Hi everyone, welcome to the Green College Resident Members Series. I'll begin by acknowledging that UBC Point Grey campus is on unceded Musqueam territory. My name is Michael. I'm one of the organizers this year of the Resident Members Series. For those that are not familiar, the Green College Resident Members Series is a weekly lecture series, public lecture series, in which resident members of the college, so graduate students or postdocs at UBC, present on a topic related to their research or field of study. I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker. Mitchi Kamigaki-Baron is a PhD candidate in linguistics at UBC. Her research involves understanding how multilingual speakers systematically store and access language sounds, and how linguistic sound categories are built by learners of a second language. She is involved primarily in two languages spoken in her home community, Pidgin and Olelo, Hawaii, and a First Nations language spoken in British Columbia, Sewuk Mekchin. So with that, please give a warm welcome to Mitchi.
Hi everyone, this is really awkward. I'm just gonna have to speak in this. I can take it off, that's how microphones work. Hi everyone, so thanks for coming. I'm usually over there, and now I'm over here, so it's kind of awkward. So today I'm going to be talking about some of my research, which falls within the general theme of learning a second language by utilizing a first language. And I am using Hawaii as a case study, and so just to kind of mediate your expectations, I'm going to be starting from that place, and that's just kind of how my research is oriented. But I will kind of have closing discussion on how the implications of the study might reach beyond the Hawaiian context. In this presentation, you will be presented with a community-based problem, be introduced with the current research question, which investigates a linguistic solution to this problem. Next, become familiar with one example experimental task used to investigate the research question. And lastly, understand potential implications beyond the scope of the Hawaiian context. That's just a bit about me, other than stuff that Michael said. I'm a PhD candidate in experimental linguistics. And a lot of what I do is sort of oriented back to my family and my place of origin. So I'm from the occupied kingdom of Hawaii. And there's a bit of positionality. So my family immigrated to Hawaii in the late 1800s from Hiroshima, Japan, and and this was prior to U.S. occupation. And so sort of behind who my family is and when they came to Hawaii, a lot of my family's history in Hawaii orients itself with just very direct experiences with language in Hawaii. So this being Pidgin and Olelo, Hawaii. And so a lot of what I do just starts from that place. I'm really motivated by just work that serves my community and is allegiant to the Hawaiian, I guess, value system. And also just starting with my family. So linguistics is a very broad field. My area in linguistics generally falls along these three categories. So I'm interested in multilingual psycholinguistics, which is basically cognition of speech. How is speech produced? How are we planning those motor skills made to speak language? How can we perceive language? How are we comprehending language, right? And this kind of involves how is language mentally stored in the mind, and how can we access that language? And the multilingual component of that is what do we do when we speak more than one language? Second language acquisition, or L2 acquisition for short, is just how can we learn a second language, and what are the processes behind that? And I often orient myself in just Bayesian-based frameworks, so just kind of how do we utilize statistical knowledge and when we're considering learning a second language. And I kind of focus on phonetics, which is just sounds of the language, and speech acoustics. And language continue as kind of just this idea of, well, usually in bilingualism studies, we talk about two languages that are very distinct. And I like to look at languages that might be less distinct. So something that falls between a language and a dialect or an accent. And there's a lot of space between that realm. So how does that challenge expectations that we might have with bilingual language processing when we speak languages that are kind of more close together? And I'm really, I guess, a major theme in what I like to do is just starting with linguistics and using academics to kind of orient itself towards community. I really hope that my work just doesn't serve only linguists, but also members of the community. So some of the work that I've been doing with outside of the Hawaiian context is within the Swakma community in interior BC. Some of my consultants are watching the live stream, so kudos to them for coming. But yeah, this is kind of another example of just starting with an issue that is brought up by the community and kind of using that to motivate the research. So long story short, this is a very small language community currently. There's one author of a single dictionary, and he wrote this dictionary in the 70s, and he's the main author of many of the theories of the language. He proposed a theory that, in speaking with community members, the community told me seemed wrong. So I wanted to use the tools that we have today to test that theory, and in fact, the community was correct. And that linguist who made the dictionary was wrong, right? So we can see that there are major implications with a small language community that is using a single dictionary that perhaps just put the hands of the authority in the wrong place, right? An external member who had maybe a linguistic advantage or something like this, or he had some kind of expertise with that label. But it kind of just goes to show, just another example of just how work should be oriented towards community and kind of place people in the community as the ultimate experts. Most of the work that I do does deal with Pidgin and its relation to Olelo Hawaii. So what are these languages? So the Hawaiian context is involved with three major languages, these being Olelo Hawaii, Pidgin, and English. Olelo Hawaii is the indigenous language to Hawaii, so it's otherwise called just Hawaiian. This is a Polynesian language. It's related to languages like Maori, Samoan, and Tahitian. And it's endangered language, roughly spoken by 2,000 speakers natively. Pidgin is a Creole language, which is basically a contact language. It borrows many linguistic features from many languages and is spoken by members of the community as a first language. This language emerged in the historic plantations in Hawaii. It's really interesting how these kinds of languages tend to develop. With this language and many other languages like it, there was a lot of intentionality by the owners of the plantation to maintain control by recruiting members of the laboring population from many different countries because they wouldn't be able to speak the same language. And this would prevent uprising and things like that, right? So it was just a way to maximize control. So Pidgin actually was this language that just kind of resulted of people just not listening to that, right? They just made their own language. So Pidgin borrows linguistic features from languages including English, Olelo Hawaii, Japanese, Portuguese, Chinese languages, Philippine languages, and many more. It's a majority language in Hawaii spoken by 500,000 people natively. But there are negative language attitudes associated with the language, including negative descriptors such as crass, uneducated, low class, rough. How do we get here? This is a very, very brief history of how we got to this place. Olelo Hawaii was once the majority language in the Hawaiian Kingdom. In fact, it was a monolinguistic nation before contact. But even after contact, it was still a majority language. But it was not until the U.S. kind of had this idea of taking Hawaii. So basically, it was the way that this was instantialized in the first place was that it started in schools, right? So there was post foreigners coming to Hawaii. There was a lot of mass indigenous death, right? And so this death was basically used by missionaries to claim that English should actually be the medium of instruction. So with this quote, this reverend in 1895 said, "With this knowledge of English will go into the young American and Christian ideas, and as this knowledge goes in, kahunaism, fetishism, heathenism will largely go out." So it was basically used to justify how, what are we doing with this problem of people dying? Well, let's use English, that this will save Hawaiians. And so Hawaiian was banned in schools in 1896. And this was a major shift in power of which language be spoken in the islands. And soon it became very difficult to find work without English. And it made this differentiation between English being just the language of the educated. And this quickly sort of took into place the colonial regime of the United States in Hawaii and led to the illegal annexation by the United States. So today, when we fast forward into time, today Olelo Hawaii is an endangered language, and it's most often heard in so-called traditional domains. Pidgin, like I mentioned before, emerged due to this absence of a common language, right? But once again, what happens when we have a language that is basically a majority language with the working class, right? It becomes a threat, right? So a lot of the plantation owners and major figures involved in education in Hawaii said, well, let's come up with this idea called the English Standard School System, which would basically, and this is well documented, use language as kind of a means of racially segregating schools without explicit mentions of race. So they would have an English Standard School System, which had the best resources and the best teachers. And in order to get there, you had to speak English. The other schools would be Pidgin speaking. And so this kind of created this dynamic that we come to know today, where even though Pidgin remains a majority language, it's very stigmatized, it's punished in schools, and it's pathologized, right? A lot of speakers of the language are just associated with this label of having a lack of ability. And there's legal precedent to prevent employment on Pidgin accented English, which remains current and unchallenged to this day. And as a result of all of this, Pidgin is sort of stuck in informal domains to be spoken in. So I present to you the current community-based problem. Pidgin is a language that a lot of people speak, but there are negative language attitudes that prevent the language to be spoken freely. And this consequently prevents equal access to education. So we pose the question, how can we destigmatize Pidgin and improve access to education? With Olelo Hawaii, not a lot of people speak this language. Oh no, I thought I wrote something else. It's an endangered language, and there are very few opportunities to use the language across domains of society in Hawaii. So we pose the question, how can we improve learning outcomes of Olelo Hawaii and support the revitalization movement? A potential solution to this problem is using Pidgin as a medium of instruction to teach Olelo Hawaii. This, in essence, may feed two birds with one stone. This might entail disconnecting stigma of Pidgin in schools, but also potentially improves acquisitional outcomes of Olelo Hawaii and supports the revitalization movement. But we do know that there is some baseline benefit that we have here in the first place, because simply by increasing access to education to first language Pidgin speakers, we expect this to already have the outcome of improving learning outcomes, right? And this is just based on previous research, which demonstrates that the use of the mother tongue as a medium of instruction are linked to many benefits, including increased motivation to succeed, increased student participation, increased parental involvement, dramatically improved learning outcomes, lower dropout rates. And in contrast, research demonstrates that the suppression of the mother tongue in instruction is identified as a root cause of emotional distress among students and significantly impedes learning. So we might pose the question, are there additional linguistic advantages that we see in teaching Olelo Hawaii using Pidgin? So this is the broad research question that I'm starting with. And we've hypothesized that there are, based on previous linguistic research. Previous research in linguistics says that related languages have linguistic processing and learning benefits. For instance, languages that are socially connected. So say we have two languages, Maori accented English and Maori. These are two languages that are associated with a single social group, Maori people. In a study conducted in 2016, it was found that Maori words were processed faster when speech before it was in Maori accented English. How does this work? So basically what we do when we're listening to speech is we're not just capturing the message behind that speech, but we're also extracting finely grained detail very automatically, which extracts social information about the speaker as well as information about which language is being spoken. So when we basically encode these connections between languages, this is actually increasing cognitive efficiency, right? Because storing acoustic detail will tell us which speaker is most likely to produce a language and informs us which language we should prepare to hear. A second way that languages can be connected is contextually, right? So say I'm a speaker that speaks Cantonese and Vietnamese at home, and after this experience over time, one may co-associate these languages in the mind of the listener, right? Such that hearing one language may prepare the listener to hear the second language, right? And as a consequence, will be faster and more accurate at accessing the words from the second language if that switch does happen, right? Again, this is sort of just another process involved with just your brain trying to be most efficient, right? So storing this contextual connection between languages will increase cognitive efficiency because encoding prior knowledge of this co-occurrence will lead to better informed predictions about which language will be spoken in a given context. Lastly, languages that are linguistically connected also have been shown to have learning benefits. So say we have two languages that are similar across some linguistic dimensions, for example, having two tonal languages. Theory suggests that statistical regularities in the two languages will be similar enough to allow the listener to bootstrap their knowledge of the first language and learning the second language. So this brings me back to the Hawaiian context. These two languages are related in many ways. So they're both speakers, most speakers of both Pidgin and Olelo Hawaii are Kanaka Maoli. They're both used in contexts of resistance against American assimilation, and they're inherently linguistically connected, right? Olelo Hawaii is the main substrate language of Pidgin. So what does it mean to be linguistically related, right? So this is just at the syntactic level or just the word order level. So if I'm going to be saying the phrase, your girl is cute, in Hawaiian I can say, nani ke kaikamahine, and in basically the word order of this is directly mapped to Pidgin, cute, the girl, cute, the girl. But in English, this doesn't make any grammatical sense, right? Cute, the girl. You sound like, yeah, that's not right, right? But it does make sense in Pidgin. And so you can see here that it directly maps onto Hawaiian. We can also see the connections at the word level. So if I'm going to be saying the phrase, oh, the laulau is delicious, this is laulau, the food. In Olelo Hawaii, I could say, ho, ono ka laulau. And in Pidgin, I can say, ho, ono da laulau, right? So you can see there's a direct comparison where there's just 3 out of 4 words in common with Olelo Hawaii for Pidgin. At the sound level as well, Pidgin and Olelo Hawaii vowel systems use duration as a primary cue to distinguish contrasting vowels, while English does not. So let's look at an experimental task to just see what we can do here. So this experimental task that I'm going to be presenting to you to just explore this research question, right, is called cross-language priming. So with this task, we'll ask the more narrow research question, do trilinguals of Olelo Hawaii English and Pidgin faster access Olelo Hawaii lexicon or words when primed by Pidgin? So what is priming? So I was wondering if I could have a volunteer. Or maybe, okay, Aaron, okay. Well, we're going to listen to Aaron say these words, okay? Just shout. Okay. Great. Now everybody else will see the words that you hear on the screen. Thank you very much. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So basically, experiencing this word before, you all heard Aaron say snow, right? Experiencing this word before makes experiencing it a second time faster. So if I were to really time how long it took you to say this, theory says that you'll say this word faster because you heard it before. And that's what priming is, essentially. So what is cross-language priming, right? Basically, it's the same thing, but you can cross over the boundaries. So who speaks Mandarin? Oh, yeah, you want to be my volunteer? Okay, everyone who speaks Mandarin, you can say shit. Okay, and then? Oh, yeah, thank you. Okay, now we're going to say it in this language. Everybody can say, yeah. Right, okay. So basically, if you're bilingual, this works in the same way as it would if you were saying it in a single language, right? Basically, it's saying that if you say it again, you're experiencing it for a second time, it's going to be faster to say, right? Or, yeah, it'll be faster to say or even pick out, right? However, if these languages are even more connected to each other, then theory says that this priming effect will be stronger, so it'll be even faster if the languages are related to each other in some way. This was in fact found in Sakei et al. In 2016. So Maori accented English was faster to prime Maori words than Pakeha English, which is just non-Maori, but also New Zealand English. And so that was faster than the alternative form of English, right? So this demonstrates that there was some connection between the two languages, Maori English and Maori, that actually offered that priming effect that was stronger. So we hope to kind of replicate this study with Pidgin and Olelo Hawaii to see if maybe English and Pidgin have differences in which language will basically prime Olelo Hawaii lexical items faster. Something that's different about this study, though, is that right, these are trilingual speakers of the language, right? And most people who speak Hawaiian also speak English and Pidgin, right? So you could say that all of these three languages are spoken by the same person, but we're wondering if there's still a connection that's stronger because there is a lot of linguistic similarities and perhaps other similarities that will tie Pidgin and Olelo Hawaii together more strongly than English and Olelo Hawaii. So some implications beyond the Hawaiian context. In accessing a language, basically this is when you're studying a language with the context of the language use in mind, this might lead to improving access, right? So what does this mean, right? So if I'm going to be studying a language and I'm really interested in, for example, ordering food, if I'm going to be sitting at my desk studying this, it really helps to anchor down on details that can use to access bits of that context while you're studying, right? So if you're really imagining the ordering of food, who are you talking to? What are other things that you might see in your environment? What do you expect to be heard? These sorts of anchor points in context might help you access the word knowledge that you have in that language. Also, the learning of basically the knowledge of a language that is similar along some acoustic dimension might help learn a new language. And this is really interesting because other studies support this, but even our exposure to a language that was spoken by our grandparents, but just with an accent with their English, right? This entails basically a sound system knowledge that you might have just by knowing what their accent sounds like, even in English, right? And so if you are exposed to this language or this variety of English, for example, you're more likely to have statistical knowledge of the target language's sound system that gives you an advantage when learning that language. And many of us also speak languages that are somewhat in between, right? So for example, if you are a speaker of so-called Chicano English and you might not speak Spanish, or if you're a speaker of Res English without speaking Cree, for example, basically these contact languages are essentially overlap along several linguistic dimensions to a potential target language that you might want to learn, and this offers an advantage, just cognitively speaking. Research also suggests that ambient learning of a language and related languages can help us build statistical knowledge of that language, and gives us knowledge required in developing this efficiency, right? So even watching TV, right, this is why we're kind of anchoring to certain points and building statistical knowledge of the language. And also just kind of pinpointing, examining how your native language is similar or different can help you focus on which cognitive skills to develop. So if you're really thinking about just language learning as sort of just going to the gym, and if there are certain differences in your language, perhaps you don't speak a tone language, but you're really interested in learning Mandarin, and you want to develop your ability to perceive tones, then listening to tones and trying to kind of categorize them in different kind of environments really might help develop this as a skill. And so just kind of focusing on language building as kind of a skill building component is a good place to start, and kind of sets a different starting point than you might if you just start from scratch. Also, in developing knowledge of how language is spoken socially, how is it contextualized, and what are linguistic connections between your language and the target language, the Bayesian perspective will basically say you should develop prior knowledge, right? So basically what this means is that in order to kind of create these kinds of connections or knowledge of these connections, you need to be exposed to it as much as possible. I know that this sounds obvious, but it's hard to actually get that from inside the classroom or reading a book, right? Speech is really messy, right? So many studies show us this. A tall person's production of a sound will be really different than a short person's sound. If you studied physics at all, you'll know that different vocal tract sizes are basically just different sized tubes, which would create different acoustics, right? And we're doing this automatically all the time. We're not asking everybody what height are you, and kind of like creating this calculation all the time. We do it automatically. And words also can be produced very differently, and the boundaries of grammar rules can be pushed in different directions based on who the speaker is, but yet we're able to do this very naturally and automatically when we're speaking our first language. This whole process is even more complex for multilinguals, right? Because you're not only doing all of this at the same time, but you're also controlling competing activation between language systems that you know. And so encoding these connections of speech to people, places, and things are actually required to disambiguate speech. And we do this all the time speaking our first language. And you can't do this with your second language without a large sample size, right? What does it sound like for a tall person to speak this language that I'm learning, as opposed to a short person? And more exposure basically leads to better tuned categorization procedures and better language processing. And so just a concluding note here, learning of heritage languages is seen as a practice, as a practice is seen as an integral part of healing, as many languages contain unique linguistic features which enable the expression of intimacy and well-being. And this is particularly important for communities which have experienced language loss or language violence en masse. So I just wanted to say that. It's really nice to learn our languages. Mahalo nui loa. Thanks, mahalos. Thank you.